I'm going to hit the theme here.
And I quote, "I'll be there in a minute. Give me a second."
Time is relative, folks. Time is relative.
Yes. So, hey, cheers to everybody in the chat.
They're a division rival. I don't care how many wins they get. Screw them.
That wasn't the take I was expecting to hear.
I want to gush over watching live Chris Tanev.
I think that we completely underestimate the skill it takes to play defense.
One highlight or several highlights does not a Calder trophy make.
I'm stepping in here. I'm going to be the crotchety old man here. They need to learn patience. They need to understand the tension, and everything, and the drama.
How dare! Look at this. How is McDavid not getting a penalty?
You guys need to calm down with this, okay? You guys need to calm down with it.
There is no time for calmness now. We are getting into the regular season, Tyler, so we are all ready to go and hyped up. Welcome to the Shifts and Pucks podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at Shifts and Pucks, Facebook.com Shifts and Pucks, Twitch.com Shifts and Pucks. Subscribe wherever you get, YouTube.com Shifts and Pucks, and subscribe wherever you get your audio. And we're doing division previews. We did the Metropolitan Division preview with the Sports Beard, and we are now doing what I think is the most interesting division in the NHL. It is the Atlantic Division preview, and we have one of the most interesting people on the internet to join us. Hot Take Hockey, John Viveiros. Hello, how's it going? Great to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Kev. I appreciate it. I've checked in with your pod over the years, and it's crazy going into the season. The Atlantic Division. It's kind of the stories, the teams knocking on the door, being the Ottawas, the Buffaloes, the Detroits, and then you got the top four. So we'll talk about that. But yeah, there's a lot of storylines going into the new year. Even with the NHL, the confusion for fans we got games in Prague, but then preseason games still going on. So obviously we're going to talk about the timeline of things like that. But yeah, Kev, appreciate you having me on, and I'm excited for the season.
I'm excited for the season. Yes, and it is a little weird that as we are recording this, the New Jersey Devils and Buffalo Sabres are playing their second game of the season. Well, there are teams like your Maple Leafs that, when we're recording this, are going to play their final preseason game against the Detroit Red Wings. It's fascinating. And there is a lot of fascinating stories here. And let's start with the top four, because your Leafs are do we agree that the top four in this division is going to generally be Boston, Florida, Tampa, Toronto?
Yeah, I would say so. Boston, obviously the Swayman situation plays a part in that. And then I would say Tampa, I think they're looking for big years from like aging guys and like Vasilevsky and Hedman. So I think those two are maybe just based on one or two players, but yeah, for the most part, I would say those are going to be your top four. I'd say that's pretty solidified, at least going into the season.
Yeah. And there was a lot. So within those four, we had a lot of like big stories. We already talked about the Jeremy Swayman situation. Steven Stamkos is going to be wearing a Nashville Predator jersey. That is going to be weird to watch for a while. Mm-hmm. We also have, of course, Florida. They've had a lot of loss this year. And of course, you lose Brandon Montour. I think that's going to be a pretty significant loss. And we'll get into this a little bit, but I also think that they're going to get off to a slow start. And then, of course, with the Leafs, of course, a number of big things. One of the biggest things being is that there's a new captain, and it is the face of the franchise has now got the C on his chest, and Austin Matthews. So within all of that, what were some of the highlights from these big four? What were your takeaways?
Yeah, so like you said, a lot of storylines, and I don't know if you're more specifically going into like the moves that were made or just specifically.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think I would consider the Austin Matthews captaincy a move that was made in the offseason
Yeah,
because you've changed the culture, you've changed the direction of your franchise in a sense.
yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of different perspectives there. So, I mean, obviously the Mitch Marner contract situation's looming, and then you've got kind of a new, I would say, look in terms of leadership. So, yeah, I mean, I look at all those storylines, Kev, and I mean specifically kind of look at those top four teams. The only team that's kind of had some consistency in that top four. In terms of leadership, has been the Florida Panthers. Like Barkov's kind of been their guy. They've built around Barkov, even coming back after winning the Stanley Cup. The Panthers didn't really have too many changes to their overall roster. Like obviously losing Oliver Ekman-Larsson, losing Montour is going to play a part in their back end. Losing Anthony Stolarz as a backup, we're going to see what Spencer Knight is for Bobrovsky this year, and who takes the reins. But yeah, you see like obviously Boston changing captains, Toronto changing captains, Tampa moving on from Stamkos. So a lot of leadership change in that Atlantic division. So we'll see if that plays a part in the positioning. But yeah, I mean, specifically for Toronto, like you said, they're my team. So yeah, there's a lot of guys that are coming in, either trying to break through finally, like a Nick Robertson, who's kind of gone off here in the preseason, and then of course bringing in a guy like Max Pacioretty. So we'll see how that kind of plays a part in the Atlantic Division as well. Former Montreal Canadian, former captain of Montreal. That's probably one that's going under the radar because the end of the day, Pacioretty for 3 years now has kind of been a storyline connected to injuries, connected to maybe his career being over. And now he's coming in and he's been, I mean, more so than past years, he's the one that's been advocating for himself and saying he's healthy. So that could be a sneaky addition for Toronto, especially him and Tavares together, maybe on a third line veteran presence. So we'll see that perspective. I think Tampa lacks the depth right now. They brought in Gensel to kind of replace the scoring of Stamkos. But if you talk to John Cooper, talk to guys behind the scenes, they don't want Gensel to be seen as that Steven Stamkos replacement because of what Steven Stamkos did for the organization for so long. So I do look at different storylines, Kev, different moves that were made. I don't think there was anything too crazy in terms of like so Stamkos goes to Nashville, like that's Nashville's big addition. There were some teams that really went for the big fish. I mean, Boston, I would say, past the Jeremy Swayman situation, like I've been very high on what Boston did. I think they filled the two needs that they ultimately needed, which was some consistent size on that left side. So Zadorov can frankly play both sides. And I think with that Zadorov addition, and I've been kind of making sure people, like fans, realize how good this could be as the season goes on, because on paper, I look at it as like a perfect defense group. You've got the top pair of Hampus Lindholm, Charlie McAvoy. You've got the up-and-coming Mason Lohrei, who's probably going to be partnered with the steady Brandon Carlo. And then you've got a bottom pair potentially of Nikita Zadorov with Andrew Peeke. So I think Boston has a complete defense. They have two guys that will run the power play. And I like the fact that Boston, I would say, isolated those two needs and got it done. And frankly, stole both those guys from Vancouver. The other guy being Elias Lindholm to center. So the only thing I would say next to that is Elias Lindholm hasn't been a number one center since the prime days of playing with Tkachuk and Gaudreau. So we're going to see what happens there with Lindholm now being in Boston, potentially with Pasternak and Zacha on the line. So I think that's the perspective for Boston. So I would say in terms of big moves, they won, at least for me. Toronto and Florida making the smaller additions, but additions that were needed, frankly, especially for Toronto, adding OEL and tandem on the defense. So yeah, Kev, I think everyone made the moves that they needed to. Obviously, Tampa lost their captain and kind of their soul there a little bit with Stammer, but we'll see if that can be if they can kind of rally around it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you about Boston. I got to tell you, I think Lindholm is going to get back into the Selke conversation. I think they're going to allow him to play a lot like Patrice Bergeron. And I mean, the one thing that you didn't mention, but I think is going to be the two significant stories out of Boston is not only is Jeremy Swayman not there, Brad Marchand is not there, and Brad Marchand is the captain. I do wonder if they're going to get off to a slow start. I've been watching the Oilers a little bit for preseason, and I know that I kind of want to be careful when I say this because preseason can be preseason, but I can see the Oilers and the Panthers because of the length of their season last year and the fact that we went well into the summer to determine a Stanley Cup winner. The Panthers start is going to be fascinating to me as well. I mean, I think the Oilers look completely gassed, quite frankly, and I could see the Panthers looking pretty gassed too. So I think that on that part, I think that's really fascinating. And for Toronto, I think the other thing the other move that was under the radar was the Stolarz move, because you got a guy that can, whether or not Joseph Woll is healthy or not, you've got a guy that can play at least 30 to 40 games for you. So that helps you allow Joseph Woll to be healthy and get his game right. So I think you're steady in goal. You're steady. Toronto's steadier in goal. I definitely think you're steadier on the blue line. And I mean, as much as Connor McDavid is getting as much love and it's all right and it's all good, I think, let's not forget that Austin Matthews was in the Selke conversation last year, even though he led the league in scoring. So I don't know. This might be the year that I think Toronto could finish first in the Atlantic Division. Now, I mean, the question is not about from what happens from September to March. It's what happens after April, after all. But like for me, the Leafs are a better team this year than they came into like even last year.
Yeah, I mean, Kev, honestly, I think the conversation every year is they can win the division, they can pass the first round, and obviously they've done that once in recent memory. But yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, I don't think they did anything like crazy big. I mean, Chris Tanev on the surface, I think, can be a top pair guy right now. Can be a really good. I mean, I'm very happy about his balance that he's going to provide for Morgan Rielly on that top pair. So, like, I think in the now, it's a massive addition. Obviously, that contract, it's probably going to look worse and worse as it gets towards that 6-year mark. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the winning the winning signing for Toronto. Like you said, I think the others are more underrated, where it just fits kind of like Stolarz. Like, instead of bringing in like an actual backup, he's more of that 1B situation that can split games if need be. I already see some Toronto fans saying Stolarz could take the starting job a month in. So we're going to see how Woll obviously performs and if he can stay healthy, because yeah, you can't have a guy getting injured going into a game 7. So obviously, that's going to be kind of a conversation around Woll. But then again, like I said, you brought Lorentz on a PTO as well. So you brought 3 guys potentially from Florida who just won a Stanley Cup. So that's valuable. Obviously, I think I've talked about it a lot. I think everyone's talked about it, is Toronto doesn't have enough Stanley Cup winning pedigree on the team. And I mean, that's why it was a lot of disappointment for fans when you lost like Ryan O'Reilly and Luke Shen in one offseason after you brought them in. So that's been kind of an ongoing conversation, is you don't have enough winning in the locker room. And that's kind of why they've moved away from Tavares as a captain, because he was kind of that very professional, like, I don't know, low key, I would say leadership style, where you need sometimes a guy to light a fire on the, like, under the team. So I think my perspective here is hopefully they're going to get that from Austin Matthews. They brought in some Stanley Cup pedigree. They probably need more of that. So maybe that's trade deadline additions, but yeah, Kev, I like what Toronto did.
Yeah. So out of the 4, who is in your mind? Like, we'll include after April here. I mean, it stands that we know that all of these teams are probably going to try to add. Who's the most dangerous of the 4?
Yeah, so I personally think that Florida is going to be right back there. I mean, what you said is valid. That I think the start of the season is going to be a conversation. It's going to be probably looked at closely for the Florida Panthers after that short off season for them. But I think once it gets down to it, like, I don't think, like I said, Florida made many changes for them to fall down the standings. I think, like I said, Montour is going to be more of that offensive loss for them. But I think how Florida plays and how they're going to support that offense is more of a defensive game. And Montour wasn't like their defensive backbone at all. That's easy to say. So I think OEL for them was very protected on that bottom pair for most of the season. Yeah, at some points he stepped into that second pair through injuries, but I think if you can have a healthy Aaron Ekblad, Gustav Forsling can continue what he was doing there, because I mean, I think everyone recognizes Gustav Forsling as the top 20 defenseman in the league now. Like, before, he was very underrated, very under the radar. Now people regard him as one of the better defensemen in the league. So you have those 2 guys. You can stay healthy through the rest of the roster. I think Florida, the fact that they have 2 goalie options. Again, we'll see if Spencer Knight can get back to himself physically and mentally. And then they have basically everything that I think they had last year, like I said, except for maybe some more offense from the back end. So I would say Florida is probably the biggest threat in terms of the long haul, Kev, especially going into the playoffs. I think that style can't be taught. Guys like Kachuk, Stan Bennett, I watched them the last couple of years. Like, that cannot be taught. Now that they've had a taste of a Stanley Cup, I think they could be right there again. And then, yeah, I think at the end of the day, Tampa Bay, I'll give them their creds. Toronto, Boston, we know, I think they're going to get into the playoffs. They could be that 2-3 spot, get a rematch. But Tampa Bay for me is interesting because I think at the end of the day, they have all the structure again of what could be successful in the playoffs, but no Steven Stamkos. We'll see what that leadership does to them. And I think, again, their depth is really lacking, but Connor Geekie, who they acquired in the Utah trade for Sergachev, he's been really good in the preseason. So I think if he could make the team, we'll see his situation or at least have time with the team this year. And then Nick Paul needs to have a big bounce back. If they can try to structure a third line again and get some depth scoring, then I think Tampa could be a threat if they get in. But again, I think that Stamkos loss could be bigger than seen behind the scenes.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's the team that kind of teeters. I still think they're a playoff team. I don't know if you want. I mean, I still probably I have them personally in the wild card spot, but it's kind of fascinating. They're almost Pittsburgh light in the sense that they're trying to hang on to the glory, but they're kind of fading at the same time, and they just don't know where to go at this point. They're kind of in that no man's land where probably they need to rebuild, but they're also Tampa, so they don't want to rebuild, and they still have like Nikita Kucherov is one of the best players in the game. Andrei Vasilevsky, one of the best goaltenders in the game. Victor Hedman going down as one of the best defensemen to play at this game.
And Point and Gensler are in their prime still, right?
Yeah.
So
so they're going to be dangerous, and I'm a huge Braden Point guy, so that will be fascinating in terms of the top four. That I think it's good. That's the one part that is really interesting in this division, and the second part of this division is there are three teams that have been knocking at this door to get into the playoffs for years and years and years. And it's Buffalo, Detroit, and Ottawa. And then you have Montreal in here too. And we'll get to them in a second. But where are we with these guys, these three teams like Buffalo, Detroit, and Ottawa? Where are we now?
Yeah, I think so. Very different storylines. I think based on moves and based on structure that the team's built, I think Ottawa fans would have thought they made the team or made the playoffs like 2 years ago. Hasn't happened. I really think Ottawa, based on structure, Kev, is the most ready to be there. Like, you have what should be a really good goalie in Allmark now. You have a good balanced top four. Again, I don't really love the value that they got in the Chychrun trade. But Jensen does, I guess, fit a need. Like, now you've got kind of the I don't know, I would say obvious top four where it's Sanderson with Zub and Shabbat with Jensen. Like, I think that's kind of solidified for Senators fans. No debate there. And then your forward group, I mean, like I said, it's got a lot of balance. It's got everything you need. And I mean, similar to the Florida Panthers, I think you've got a couple bite type guys in there, and they even brought in a former Panther in Cousins, so they've got him in the bottom six now. But yeah, I mean, Brady Tkachuk, if he can stay healthy, you've got the skill set with Stützle and veteran presence with Giroux. Like, that's a really good balanced line if you want to run it that way. And then, of course, then you've got the conversations of like a Josh Norris who needs to stay healthy. So that's another perspective for Sens fans is like Josh Norris takes now a big bulk of the cap, close to $8 million and around there. So I think if they can get either him healthy or someone else to step up on that second line, it could be like a Shane Pinto, it could be a Ridley Gregg. I think Ottawa is the one knocking on the door, Kev. Like, they've got everything in terms of, and now in terms of a goalie, they have that as well. So I think Ottawa's right there. Buffalo, they're a bit younger and less experienced. Like, they've got a lot of guys kind of on the peripheral or at least supporting the core. And when I say core, I mean Tage Thompson, Dylan Cousins, Alex Tuck. So now your younger guys coming in, whether it's JJ Peterka or now Zach Benson, who surprised a lot of people. So I think when you look at that perspective, Buffalo probably has a little bit more time to develop these guys, and even more specifically on the back end. Now you're going into a new era of Rasmus Dahlin as the captain and Owen Power as that next man up as a future and maybe this season stud defenseman. So I could go on and on about the Sabres youth. I think they're maybe going to be ready this year, but I think Ottawa is the team that can do it now. And then Detroit, Kev, I've had so many people criticize the Yzerman plan at this point because I think the perspective is you brought in a veteran like Cam Talbot. You really don't know who your goalie is. Sebastian Costa's not ready yet. And then your defense after Seider, like I hate that defense group. I think it's slow in some aspects. Like Ben Sherratt, you're asking too much from the guy. And I mean, you brought in veteran guys that are champions like Tarasenko and Kane. So I like that for support of DeBrincat and Larkin and Raymond. But again, like what is Detroit? What's their identity? And who's their number one goalie? I think there's so many more questions for Detroit than Ottawa on paper. But again, Kev, hockey's not played on paper, so we'll see.
Well, I'm shocked. I'm, for one, very shocked that you don't like a blue line with Justin Hall on it. I am stunned by that. But the Detroit is old. Like, they just got old over the years.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the fourth oldest team in the league. This was a team that was supposed to be in a rebuild, and they just overspent on a lot of guys. And I am not high on Detroit as other people, but I mean, I don't want to be dismissive of the coach here, but is Derek Lalonde the guy that bring you to the next level? I don't know. I don't know. And I definitely think of the three, they have the weakest goaltending. So I'm super not high on Detroit. Buffalo, I think you're right. I think they're years away. Ottawa, it's about health, and it's also about, I don't want to bring up the Ridley Gregg incident again, but I mean, I think we saw this a little bit in the preseason with Ottawa. I still think this is a team that needs to find a way to grow up. I think this is a team that can really easily be rattled in situations. I think they think that they're higher than they actually are. I love Brady Tkachuk, but I think he's a guy that gets rattled way too easily. There's a real lack of composure, and I hope that Nick Jensen and Nick Cousins bring something to that. But that's my concern with Ottawa is in tough situations, in important situations, they haven't shown the composure that they've needed to tell me that they're going to take the next step. They are the most talented out of all four of the bottom four, for sure. They've got everything in place. But I look at the health of the Ottawa Senators, and I look at that maturity of this team, and I'm still not convinced.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, Kev, because there's been, like I said, there's been a couple of years now of us talking about them squeaking in, getting like last year I had them in the third division spot as a hot take because I said I looked at Florida and losing some pieces, and I said, okay, I think Florida could be that type of team. And I mean, they ended up doing that, but they were up in the division. I was like, okay, they could sneak in as a wild card and then go on a playoff type run because I truly think that's kind of what separates a team from Florida to a team like Ottawa and Toronto is Ottawa and Toronto. If they stay healthy, I think they're great regular season teams right now. But again, Ottawa's had that slow start the last couple of years where then they have to play catch up in the season. Then if they don't have health, they don't have health. So I think for Ottawa, my perspective too is also maybe the Nick Cousins, you just mentioned it, takes some distraction or like is that distraction from those other guys that maybe want to play with a bit of edge, whether it's Gregg or Tkachuk. Like Nick Cousins, maybe, I mean, he's done some, I don't know, questionable things in the past, especially like I got pretty riled up when he hit Goodbranson the way he did from behind and then like turtled and didn't want to be part of that situation. Like you don't insert yourself in that situation and then can't answer for it. So I think in this weird, good way for Ottawa, Cousins is going to be kind of that negative, like distraction away where he's not significant enough of a player, but he's like a fourth line guy, maybe in and out of the lineup. And can come in certain games like Battle of Ontario and things like that. And then you just have Tkachuk score. Like you need Brady Tkachuk to just focus on scoring. And I think ultimately like Brady wants to be where Matthew is, Matt his brother is. So that's a 90 to 100 point player. That's a guy that's staying healthy. That's got a guy scoring goals consistently on the power play 5-on-5. So I think Ottawa's right there. I'm with you. And I think the word you use and the word I use is health. I think it comes down to health big time.
Yeah. It is tragic that the only time we've seen Brady Tkachuk in the playoffs is drinking a beer, watching his brother play games. I think at some point Brady should be in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Then we have Montreal, and I think that this is the team that is most polarizing because I think not to use I'm not saying you, but I think there's a lot of teams a lot of people that are getting really high on Montreal. And I've also seen a lot of teams that are saying pump your brakes. So where are you on Montreal?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, I think it's just based on the division structure. Like, I think if Montreal is in the Pacific Division, for example, I think there's a little bit more, I don't know, openness for something to happen, especially in a wild card position. I think Montreal is just blocked by the competition right now in the Atlantic Division. There's 4 teams that are pretty solidified, at least for battling for a playoff spot right now. And then I just think when you look at the next wave of teams, Ottawa and Buffalo have taken more steps as an overall roster than Montreal has per se. So Montreal is going to be, I think, in 2-3 years built really well. Like, I think they have everything. Everything I just talked about with Ottawa has been a few years to figure it out. And I think Montreal is kind of just at that starting point where they have all the pieces in place. And now it's just going to take 1 or 2 years to figure out, okay, is this the gel? Is this the mix? Or are we going to have to make kind of decisions along the way? So, like, in terms of long term, they have their number 1 future offensive defenseman in Lane Hudson. They have their future right shot 2-way guy in Reinbacher. They've got secondary guys that can fill out, whether they keep Matheson. They've got Mailloux. They've got Caden Gooley, who's going to be a consistent top 4 defenseman. So all of that is their future. Like, that is going to be their top 4. I just named it right there. And then you have your goalie of the future with Fowler. But right now it's Montembeault and Primo probably in the crease, which if you're looking around the league and looking around the division, that's probably not good enough. Like, Montembeault's had stretches of good games, but in an overall sense, in a full season, maybe pushing for a wild card spot, like, I don't think that's enough for the playoffs, but hey, maybe it proves me wrong. But and then the forward group, I actually was like, okay, maybe this forward group can surprise us this season, but with the surprise of maybe some quick scoring at the start of the season, Patrick Laine, good story, all of that. So unfortunately that happened. He's going to be out for 1 to 2 months. We'll see his return if it's closer to the holidays. But Kev, to answer just in a simple way, they just don't have enough, and they have guys and veterans filling spots that are just not good enough. Whether it's a Josh Anderson or Brendan Gallagher, Joel Armia, like, you're not going to get big production at this point from those guys. And Armia, like the guy, underrated. Gallagher has had good moments in his NHL career, but now he's at a $6.5 or $6 million cap hit. He's stuck on the 4th line. It looks like potentially going to the season or 3rd line. So I really think it's going to be Suzuki and Caulfield that are really zoned in on as the 1-2 punch. And then Slafkovsky, I think Habs fans are really going to look at to see if he can kind of continue that progression that he had last year, because it went from, I would say, irrational conversations of him maybe being a bust, which I was never on board with.
No.
To last year, him really showing what he could be. Now it's going to be, okay, could this guy actually be like a power forward of today's game and score maybe 35, 40 goals and get 80 plus points? I think there's potential of that for Slafkovsky. I think we're just going to be looking to see if he can do that or close to that this year.
Yeah, regarding Slafkovsky, I saw the bus comments too. He's still leading that draft class in scoring, which you should. I guess you should in theory if you're the first forward taken in that draft. Mm-hmm. And I think that draft is had a disadvantage because of COVID. I think in terms of development, it's taking a lot longer for a lot of these players to get into the.
Same thing happened with the Lafreniere draft.
Yep, it totally. And now we're looking where we're seeing Lafreniere now, and look where we're seeing Quinton Byfield now. So I think with this group, you need to be a little bit more patient. Slafkovsky is right there. Caden Gooley right there. I do question their goaltending, and they've also, they brought in Kirby Dach, and Kirby Dach wasn't healthy last year. If he's healthy this year, I think they are a better team. They do have Alex Newhook. I kind of am with you. I think, just thinking about this, I actually do. I'll go bold. I do think that they finish ahead of Buffalo and Detroit.
Wow.
I don't think. I think they're going to be battling with Ottawa. I'll to go, or like the bottom 4. I would go Ottawa, Montreal, Buffalo, and I think people are going to laugh. I'm going to put Detroit in the bottom.
Oh, Kev, you're going to get something for that big time. So I was going to say for Montreal, I think the X factor, again, I'm going to go back to Laine. People might not understand why I'm coming from it at that lens, but if you look at it, okay, power play is not something you can depend on for all your scoring, but it's a huge factor in the season and obviously a bigger factor in the playoffs. But I think Laine completes that power play look for Montreal.
Yeah.
With Lane Hudson at the top of the umbrella, you have Suzuki, Caulfield, Slafkovsky around the net front. who's on the left side right now? Yeah, you could put Caulfield on that left side, but easily you could put Caulfield on that right side and have Patrick Laine is one-timer on the left side. I mean, Kev, over the years, how many successful power plays we've seen with that one-timer presence on that left side? I mean, I can name two easy ones in Ovechkin and Stamkos, but you can go a lot further than that. So I think having that Patrick Laine shot on that left side is going to be huge for Montreal's power play. So I'll say this right now. If you can bring Laine back in December and you can have him scoring like a 30, 35 goal rate, obviously he's not going to get to that with his injury probably, but if he can score on that rate, be a presence on the power play and improve Montreal's power play to be like a top 10, top 15 power play in the league, I could see your conversation being valid and where Montreal pushes a spot or two in that division. But that's a huge if, depending on when Laine comes back and if that could be a factor.
Yeah, I mean, I think with all four of these teams, there's a lot of just fascinating things. I mean, I think, don't sleep on Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen in Buffalo. He was basically one of the better goalies in the second half of the year last year. I mean, Dahlin will make that step. I feel like Buffalo, they're just not quite constructed properly still. Mm-hmm. They're still trying to figure out the pieces that they're putting in the puzzle puzzle in place. But I think there's certainly progress there. But I also think they're being as patient as possible, which is totally fair.
Yep. No, I'm with you. I think Buffalo's taken the patient approach, and I respect it. Like, I think there was an opportunity this year where they could have traded like a Peterka or a Jack Quinn for maybe a top six forward. Like, there was kind of those conversations tossed around of like even a Nikolai Ehlers in Winnipeg if Buffalo could target him. And that didn't come to fruition because I'm pretty sure Winnipeg was asking for a Jack Quinn or JJ Peterka. So I like Buffalo's approach here. I think Sabres fans were getting a little antsy to see an addition in that top six. But you know what? They have high hopes for Peterka. They have high hopes for Jack Quinn. They have high hopes for Zach Benson. All three guys who are probably top six forwards for them in the long haul. And they also have a guy named Yuri Kulich who is going to be a stud. So I think around Cousins and Tage Thompson, if all those guys I just said could pan out, I mean, Buffalo's going to be really good in the long run.
And they made an underrated move. I think that there was a lot of Oiler fans that were like, woohoo, we got Matthew Savoy. And I think Ryan McLeod he's not a spectacular ad, but he is something they don't have, which was a fourth-line player. A guy that he knows his role as a fourth-line player. And I think you need that on a Buffalo team. You can't have everybody. Buffalo has a lot of guys that are the same, right? Small or scoring type of forwards, and their bottom six isn't really bottom six type of players. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, Ryan McLeod, I think he's even going to start potentially on the third line, Kev, as the third line center. And I think you're right. Like, he's 6'3", he has a lot of speed. I think if you ask Sabres fans, and from what I saw last year, like, the penalty kill unit wasn't good enough, at least in terms of identity, bottom six guys. And I mean, Ryan McLeod is a guy that could potentially put up 15 goals in a season. I think when you look at those type of guys, and sometimes I'll reference Toronto, but this is a good example, is like a David Kampf type player, like really good defensive center, really good penalty kill guy. Like, that's as good as you're going to get in terms of that type of player, but he doesn't really provide offense. Where Ryan McLeod, that's the value. And I think that trade was, I understand. I criticize the trade big time because I think I'm a big advocate of like asset management. And I really think their asset management on Matthew Savoy wasn't good enough, frankly. I understand the injury issues and the kind of understanding that he's undersized. So they made the trade, and I understand why they did it. Because, yeah, you just said it. They don't have those type of players. They don't have those 6'3" fast players that can play that defensive game. And McLeod's also good on the draw. So I think the face-off value there is good. And this was underrated as well, and I mentioned this in my video, is Tage Thompson and Dylan Cousins are both right shot centermen.
Yeah.
You need left shot on the draw, especially in the defensive zone, and Ryan McLeod with a good draw percentage is that left shot center. So I think that's the value as well.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So how many teams in the Atlantic get into the playoffs?
So I think, at least 4 for sure. I think there's too much competition there. The Metro, balancing that out, like, there's a lot of teams in the Metro that are knocking on the door, so that could play a part. Like, I think in this weird way, I think Tampa's a lot closer to the Pittsburgh and Washington situation than we've seen in the past. Like, I think Pittsburgh and Washington, we've seen as that aging unit, and seen as maybe that team pushing out. I think Tampa, even though they, like I said, they have Gensel in their prime, they have Point in their prime, they even have Hagel. I don't think Hagel's talked about enough. Even Cirelli, you could see if Cirelli has a big bounce back year. So I think Tampa's still in that picture, maybe getting a little bit closer to that Pittsburgh-Washington conversation, but still there. So I'm going to say at least 4, Kev. But, I mean, I'm being pushed to say Ottawa just because I like Ottawa's overall roster better than a lot of those teams in the Metro. And my hot take this season, and again, I really don't want to bet against Rod Brind'Amour and the Hurricanes, but I am not high on the Hurricanes. And I more than any other year, I don't know if they're good. Like, their structure and the way they play is perfect to get into the playoffs and play in the playoffs. But is Rod Brind'Amour's style and coaching and I would say structure of that team good enough to be a top team in the Metro? I think they still can be, but they lost a lot of pieces. I know this is not a Metro preview, but just in comparison to what Ottawa has as an overall roster, like, they lost Gensel. Obviously, that was a midseason addition. But they lost Teravainen, which is underrated. And on that back end, like, it cannot be overstated how valuable Brady Shea and Pesce were to that team. Like, Slavin is one of the most underrated, like, two-way defensemen in the league. Yeah. He's up there, but he can't do it all on his own. And if there's one thing that I'm going back to the Atlantic here that Tampa learned last year is, yes, Hedman's getting older. That is a huge, like, I would say, sticking point in his struggles. He's just getting older, as any player does. But he didn't have another matchup game guy on his team. Sergachev was struggling on the defensive side. What do they do in the offseason? They bring back his buddy Ryan McDonough to partner up with Chernak. So McDonough and Chernak can take all the defensive responsibilities, and Hedman can kind of get back to his offensive game. Well, with Carolina, what do they have after Slavin? Well, they have the aging Brent Burns, who's just getting older and older and really on the old side in terms of an NHL player. And then, Kev, after that, what do they have? They have a lot of guys for me that are like 4, 5, 6s on most teams. And I just really don't know if they have enough on that roster. So that gives an opportunity for Ottawa, if they can stay healthy, to battle for a wild card spot. But again, people can watch this back and see that Carolina is in a top 2 spot in the Metro, and none of that conversation makes sense. But I do think Ottawa has an opportunity to break through, is what I'm trying to get at.
Well, I talked about this with the sports beat with Jeremiah, and this is Carolina. It reminds me of a lot of the LA Kings. There is a lot to really like about the Kings and the Hurricanes. But I think what the problem with the Hurricanes is the same thing with the problem with the Kings is they don't have that scorer that you fear. They don't have that guy that you're like, okay, if he has the puck, I'm afraid of him. So they're a good team that can compete. The team that I'm intrigued, I think the most intriguing team out of all of these wildcard teams is we're about to see a first full season with the New York Islanders under Patrick Waugh. They have a very underrated blue line in Noah Dobson, who will be in the Four Nations conversation, and Adam Pelech, who should be in the Four Nations conversation for Canada, by the way. They have an elite goalie in Sorokin if he gets healthy. They may not have the offensive weapons that the other – I mean, I think they're equal to Carolina in offensive weapons, but this is the first full season under Patrick Waugh. Is going to be absolutely fascinating. They're the team that I think – I have them in the playoffs. Whether they finish 3rd or 4th in the Metro is fascinating, because I think I could see the Islanders finishing 3rd, and I could see Carolina getting to the wild card spot and battling there. So that's the team that intrigues. That's from the Atlantic side that does intrigue me. But I mean, I think, yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think it's the first 4 that we talked about: Boston, Florida, Toronto, Tampa. I think they get in, and I think it's the Islanders, Carolina, Rangers, Devils. I just don't know about. I just don't think Pittsburgh has done enough yet. I don't think Pittsburgh's a step away. Jeremiah is trying to convince me about Washington. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm intrigued by Charlie Lindgren.
Oh, I didn't know. He's trying to be careful with Washington's expectations from what he told me. But I guess if you had him way out, then maybe he's trying to sell his point. But yeah, no, Kev, I'm with you. And I think my perspective here is I'm very high on the Devils having the bounce back year. And I know a lot of people are kind of on that lens of like talking about Sheldon Keefe for coach of the year. And you know what? I see the Devils, if they can stay healthy, bouncing back. So my 1-2 punch in the Metro is Rangers, Devils. But yeah, you're right. I think there's a lot of movement potentially in that Metro versus the Atlantic, where I think maybe Ottawa's knocking on the door. Maybe Buffalo surprises us later in the season. Maybe Detroit's veteran presence is enough. Montreal, we'll see. But I think there's more of that mix in the Metro where there's more teams that could kind of, I don't know. I think the standings will be a little closer in the Metro is what I'm trying to get at. So we'll see what happens in the Atlantic.
Yeah. Anything else within the Atlantic that we should talk about?
So, I mean, yeah, I think, like I said, I think the Boston Jeremy Swayman situation is going to be very interesting here. I think based on the conversations I've had in the last couple of days, Kev, I think they're going to figure it out. I think it was a matter of Swayman taking a few days, similar to, I mean, this is actually in a weird way going to maybe benefit Boston in the long haul if they can figure it out. Like if Swayman doesn't want to change his mind and he asks for a trade, then that would be a nightmare for them. But I think if they can figure it out, last year it looked like Swayman really channeled a lot of the conversations that were in the arbitration hearing to good, and frankly to a really good playoff performance for himself. So I think similar to that, he could channel a lot of what's happened here in the negotiations into good for the Boston Bruins if they can figure it out. So I truly think that Boston could be right there in the top of the league again, right there in terms of a deep playoff team. You said it yourself, Toronto's Toronto. You never know what you're going to get outside of first-round exits, but maybe that changes. Tampa with the aging. Florida with the short summer. Boston, that's why I was so on Cam Neely. The fact that you muddied this up, if you could have a healthy Jeremy Swayman, a happy Jeremy Swayman, a content, ready-to-go Jeremy Swayman into the season, at the start of the regular season, not missing any games, you could be one of the best teams and maybe the best team in the Atlantic Division with your balance, with the defense core you've built, and having that number one goalie. I think what they've done with Allmark and Swayman here is a massive mistake. Obviously, they had to trade Allmark in terms of the money and looking at an extension for Allmark. He would have wanted a lot of money in Boston. So you agreed to pay Swayman, but now you're not paying Swayman. So that's the problem here for Boston. That's probably how we close it out, Kev, because I think that's the one storyline that's sticking for the Atlantic in understanding how it's going to shape out. Because, Kev, if Swayman goes right into that December deadline to sign, again, in a couple of days after recording this, maybe he's signed. But if he doesn't, that's going to make or break Boston's, I would say, like solidified spot in that top four we've been talking about this whole show.
Well, the other thing, just and to add to that, though, is the fact of the matter is the one thing that I would be concerned about if I'm a Bruins fan is he didn't have a training camp. And I do think that, you know, I don't have anecdotal evidence, but I always feel like if you don't have a training camp, there's a better chance of being hurt or a struggle, right? So,
yeah, 100%. And I'll say this too, Kev. I know it's a Leaf related thing here, but Louis Gross, the agent of William Nylander, when Nylander pulled this thing and took it right to the December 1st deadline or whatever it was, early December, Nylander had the worst year I've ever seen from him in his career so far. And that was, like you said, he missed training camp, he missed the first 2 months of the season, and he never got his role going. Like, he never got into stride. He was nowhere close to the player he can be. Again, you're comparing a forward to a goalie. But I think if anything, Kev, more so for goalies, they need their stride and they need their routine. So if Swayman's way out of routine, didn't get his training camp, not playing the first 2 months of the season, that could be a huge, huge issue.
Yeah, I agree with you. All right, let's leave it there. Tell everyone how to follow you if they don't know.
Yeah, thanks, Kev. Yeah, it's Hot Take Hockey on YouTube, X, Twitter, TikTok if you use it, not really on there as much. Instagram sometimes. So Hot Take Hockey, all platforms. John Viveiros _ on my personal platforms. And make sure you follow Shifts and Pucks. That's the place to be. And we'll post some clips here maybe. But big shout out to Kev. Big shout out to the NHL season kicking off. And I appreciate you having me, Kev.
Yes. And of course, you can follow us on social media at Shifts and Pucks on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. And you can follow me, follow Shauna, Beardy Canuck 03, Tyler, TNOBLE, Chris is Schneid's, SCHNEIDZ. I am KEVOLE. And of course, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And we will talk to you all very soon. Bye for now.